going to be recorded. So people who are unable to attend today can see it later. Well, thank you everyone for joining us this afternoon. My name is Sydney Miller. I'm the lead research technician at the Vermont Bee Lab. We're a lab at University of Vermont that focuses on pollinator health through research, education, and outreach. So today we have joining us Laura Johnson and Sarah Kingsley Richards from UVM Extension, as well as Kurt Hadley and Bob Walters from FieldWatch. And to begin, Laura's gonna give us a briefing on Vermont's new rule, the Protection of Bees, Rule Section 504 for pesticide applicators. This may be new to some people. This might be a refresher. And then later on, we will have Bob and Kurt give us an overview on FieldWatch registries. So FieldWatch is a free-to-use online mapping platform that enables communication and collaboration between growers, pesticide applicators, and beekeepers to work together and minimize the risk of accidental pesticide exposures to bees and other sensitive crops. This tool could also serve to easily comply with Section 504, to be able to interact with those surrounding your application site and to connect agricultural sectors. So I know that many of you are looking to receive pesticide credits for attending today. So in order to receive credit, just stay for the duration of the session, and I will provide a survey at the end of the session, which you will need to fill out as well. For those of you who are joining but aren't receiving credit, I still kindly ask that you fill out the survey. The survey is very important and will allow us to gauge the interest level in bringing FieldWatch to Vermont. Our state currently doesn't have access to this program, but with community member support, that could be a reality for Vermont. So your participation really does determine whether we move forward with this project or not. As everyone is presenting, drop any questions you have in the chat box, and while everyone is filling out the survey at the end of the session, I'll be calling out questions and letting Kurt and Laura, whoever, answer the questions. All right, so with that, I'll let Laura go ahead and share her screen.
Yeah. Everybody see that?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Laura Johnson. I work with UVM Extension, and as Sydney mentioned, I'll be talking about this new rule, Section 5.04, Protection of Bees, and I'm just giving a brief overview this afternoon. And let's see, there we go. So first, I just need to thank my funders, the Vermont Vegetable and Berry Growers Association, and of course, Extension. And my role in Extension is working with farmers and understanding farm management practices and how pollinator support practices can be layered within them in ways that support the bigger goals of the farms and their businesses. So that's my role in Extension, and I focus on all types of pollinators within the landscape, mostly wild pollinators. But today we're going to be talking more about managed pollinators and honeybees. And I also would like to start with a disclaimer that in Extension, I work in outreach, education, and research. And the rules that we're going to talk about have been put into action and are regulated by the Vermont Agency of Agriculture, Food and Markets. So this explanation is our best effort to interpret those rules, though there are, I don't know why it's going automatically, though there are some parts of the rule that are very clear and then parts of the rule that are a little more difficult to interpret. And if anybody wants to discuss that at a later time, happy to help work through that. So, and everybody is, of course, responsible for their own compliance of these rules. So the Vermont rule for control of pesticides was updated and put into effect on February 24th, 2023. and includes this section 5.04. And it applies to anybody who applies pesticides, whether you're certified or not. But of course, I see a lot of beekeepers here today. It is relevant to you all as well, just in terms of being informed and knowledgeable about how this applies to your safety and your livestock safety. So this rule only pertains to the protection of honeybees because the state of Vermont defines bees as honeybees only and doesn't consider any other type of bee or pollinator in that context. I think my slides are automatically going, so I apologize for that because I don't know how to stop that. But the rule is broken down into 3 sections in this presentation, and really focusing on communication today because of our other presenters and the intent of their programming, but also some notes on the highly toxic and application conditions and buffer situations that are associated with the rule and pesticides being applied. So the first part of the rule really addresses this, that no person shall apply a pesticide to a flowering crop without prior notification of at least 48 hours to a beekeeper who has established apiary on the premises. And so premises is, within property boundaries of where that pesticide is being applied. And we know that bees can travel a lot further than that, but for the law, that's what it pertains to. And if you're hiring somebody, then you still need to abide by this at least 48 hours in advance rule. So just a visual example of what a communication timeline might look like on a pesticide application on a blooming crop. If you're applying on a Thursday, you need to communicate with the beekeeper or a beekeeper. You should expect communication from the farm if you have apiary in that location 2 days in advance. So Thursday application, Tuesday notification, or sooner. And whatever is however much time sooner prior to the application, in addition to that 48 hours is one of these gray areas within the law. There's no ruling in this law that if the crop is not in bloom, that any notification needs to take place. But of course, it is best practice to do so in order to keep beekeepers' bees safe and also themselves as well as their working bees if something has been applied nearby. So there's this other section of the rule that highlights the this highly toxic terminology and what that means for pesticide application. And I just want to remind where you find that language on a label. And if you go to the environmental hazard section, you will see if the pesticide is highly toxic, that it will have that specific language. It's also sometimes called the environmental precaution area of the label. And sometimes it should be more than not now. You'll see this EPA bee hazard icon on the label as well if it's highly toxic to bees. If a pesticide is being applied that is highly toxic, then it should be applied during periods that the conditions will not expose honeybees. And so that would, typically mean less exposure would happen to honeybees early in the morning, at night. And then also thinking about in terms of drift to off target areas and making sure you're applying pesticides when there's maybe just a light breeze. So between 3 and in Vermont law, 9, less than 9 miles per hour. But the law says applying pesticide at wind speeds less than 9 miles per hour. Also, there is a ruling about buffers. So when applying a highly toxic pesticide, you should have a 50-foot buffer from areas where pollinators might be foraging, or a 20-foot wide non-pollinator attractive vegetative buffer that is higher than the spray release and has a 60% plant density. And I'm not going to get into this too much, but gotten a lot of questions about this along the way. And if anybody wants to talk more, happy to afterwards. Then finally, the last section of the rule is this fungicides and soil fumigant specification. And what that is saying is that a person who is applying pesticides shall avoid the application of a fungicide or soil fumigant to pollinator attractive plants during bloom. And it doesn't explicitly say it when you look at the law in the document, but you should know that if you're applying a fungicide or soil fumigant, then you need to be able to provide that at least 48-hour in advance notification to the beekeeper as well. And we really recommend, because as I mentioned before, there are areas of the law that are very clear. And then as you kind of dig in, there's some parts that are a little bit more difficult to interpret, is if you are applying pesticides, just to write stuff down, document it, so that if there is a complaint and an investigation by the Agency of Agriculture, then you have something to show that you've put forth a good faith effort to comply with this new ruling. In the updated pesticide document, control of pesticide document in Vermont, these are the key contacts that you could reach out to at the Agency of Agriculture. So I just wanted to share those here. And as I said before, I'm also happy to help talk through anything and then move to questions with the Agency of Agriculture as is needed. So here's my contact information, and that's all I have to share today.
Thanks, Laura. That was great. So now we can have Kurt share his screen.
Sydney, why don't you go ahead and start with Bob doing an intro, and then I will share my screen.
Sure thing. Yeah, Bob, take it away.
Thanks, Sydney. Welcome everybody there in Vermont. Bob Walters with FieldWatch. As I mentioned the other day, that some people on the call, I was the first employee hired by FieldWatch 10 plus years ago, so I have a lot of inherent knowledge of what we do and how we do it. Prior to that, we had a mapping tool, or we have a mapping tool called DriftWatch. And DriftWatch was developed by Purdue University, by the Agriculture Engineering Department, specifically for vegetable growers, tomato growers in central Indiana, southern Michigan, and western Ohio, because of the significant loss of crops and fruit for several summers. And there was a significant loss to the tune of thousands or hundreds of thousands of dollars because of drift coming from people that were spraying corn and soybeans in the Midwest, and specifically in Indiana. And it wasn't because of any intent, it was just because there was not an awareness that there were tomato crops close by. And tomatoes as a crop, like other ones, are highly sensitive to chemicals that were not supposed to be applied to them. So after some development by the GIS team at Purdue University, they came up with this mapping tool, DriftWatch. Purdue managed it, run it, they did everything for it, and the tomato growers voluntarily map their locations. It's a Google map tool. It's really simple to use the mapping feature on there. Well, after they started using it, there was a lot of other people that were growing other crops, specifically grapes, orchards, other specialty crops that were sensitive to off-target movement of chemicals. So they were added to the registry. We call it a registry. And then a couple of the other local states, nearby states, Illinois, Michigan, and Wisconsin, got interested in the mapping registry. So it expanded to the other states. All of it with the intent of communicating locations and areas where specialty crops and bees, because bees were viewed as another crop or a drop down on the map, to pesticide applicators. And it didn't matter whether they were spraying agriculture land or along the roads. everybody could get access to the tool and see what was there, what was being grown. We had a significant uptick in the number of organic growers that wanted to use it because organic growers inherently want to make sure that everybody kind of knows where they're at when chemicals are being sprayed. All that is background just to say that DriftWatch as a tool was moved out of the university. We formed a company called FieldWatch, and we were set up as a nonprofit. So we are dependent on sponsorships from other parts, from industry, from the state government, from retailers, co-ops, applicators to help do what we do. We've now expanded in 2023 to 24 states. I think the nearest one to Vermont is probably Pennsylvania or New Jersey that participate. We also have the province of Saskatchewan in Canada, and then the District of Columbia that's been mapping bees for a couple of years. District of Columbia is kind of an interesting thing for us because prior to that, we had always talked about urban beekeepers, but now we really truly understand the number of beekeepers that are urban beekeepers. In District of Columbia, that little 68 square mile part of the world, there's 400 or 500 beekeepers, and they weren't necessarily concerned about people spraying agriculture because in DC there's no agriculture to speak of. But what there is, there's streams and rivers, there's roadsides that are being sprayed, there are golf courses being sprayed, backyards, trees and shrubs. Collectively, all that spray that's gone on those other items can affect honeybees and pollinators. So District of Columbia now maps beehive locations. You know, some of the bees are on top of buildings, garages, backyards, they're all over the place. But that kind of put our stamp on the map for urban beekeeping. So when you look at our map, you'll see beehives everywhere, you know, urban areas, rural areas, suburban areas across the United States. So when you look at what we do today, as an entity, we work with individual states to encourage them to use the mapping tool. It's a free tool. We encourage crop producers, beekeepers to map their locations. That information then is shared with an applicator. In our system, we have two types of users. We have the producer, which would be a beekeeper, or it would be a crop producer. Then we have applicators that register with us, and we encourage them to register so that they receive information. And what I'll mention, one of the key reasons is that early on, as I mentioned, we mapped the bees, and they looked like polygons on our map, just like the crops. Well, it was hard to discern where the bees were, whether they were on the South 40 or the North 40 or where they were at. So we created a mapping registry called BeeCheck. It's a sister registry of DriftWatch. All the data that comes in there, it comes from beekeepers. It all ends up in the same place for an applicator to see. But there were a couple of requirements that beekeepers had that weren't really applicable to crop producers. One, they told us they wanted to be identified either as a hobbyist or a commercial beekeeper. One, they say they often move their hives, so they wanted flexibility to move the hives. Third, they wanted to identify the number of hives at their apiary, whether it was 1 or 15 or 20. And then fourth, and probably the most important reason of developing BeeCheck was the capability for a beekeeper, if they so choose, is to map their location and mark it as private, which would mean it doesn't appear on the public map. So if you were to look at the public map today, and you can look at Pennsylvania, New Jersey, Delaware, Indiana, wherever it looks at, and you will see all the crop sites and a lot of the beehive sites. Some of them may be marked private. So the only people that are going to see those private locations are applicators that are registered with us. And that's why we encourage applicators to register us. One, they see all the beehive locations, but then two, every time there's something new or modified added to our map, we send a message to that applicator or the group that has the account. And we just say, hey, there's something new there, so please check it out. They click on the link and it takes them right to it. So it's a very simple to use tool. Beekeepers, we have an app that works on both Android and iOS. That's easy to sign up, easy to map, easy to move your hives around. So It's fairly simple. We have an app that's used by applicators too. And I think Kurt probably will touch on that a little bit more, but specifically for beekeepers, the BeeCheck app is used across the United States. And right now we have a tremendous amount of activity. And I don't know if any of you are involved with this, but as hives move into California right now from across the country for the pollination of almonds here in the springtime, they're using our app to move them from South Dakota, Montana, or wherever it's at, into the state of California, then place them accordingly. So across the nation, we have thousands of locations and thousands of beehive sites, thousands of crop sites, that all in the interest of being a good steward. It's really a tool for the applicators to use, and it's really encourage you to share your information so we can avoid any type of conflict or issue. Certainly, we want to avoid any type of claims if that were to come to that, like we've had in the past. And it happens, and when somebody sprays a chemical, it's going to drift no matter if it goes just a couple feet or a couple miles. So that's why we really encourage agriculture to work together, and specifically crop producing beekeepers with applicators. So I'll pause there, Sydney, because I know Kurt has some presentation information and probably a lot more detail, but that's kind of a high level overview of where we're at today as FieldWatch, and we look forward to building a partnership there in Vermont.
Thanks, Bob.
Yes, thanks, Bob. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here in just a second. And I'm also going to go ahead and shut off my video because I find it easier. I know, at least for me, when I'm part of one of these presentations, if I don't have to look at the person that's talking as well. And bottom line is nobody wants to look at me. So here we go. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. You should see it now. And so what I'm going to walk through is a handful of slides that talk about and show exactly what we do. And again, I want to thank Sydney and Laura and Sarah, as well as Bob, and also let you know that we have also spoken with the Vermont Department of Agriculture. So just as Sydney had said, there is a survey at the end of this presentation, and that is really where the Vermont Department of Ag will determine whether or not you all have interest in using this type of registry. So, all I'm going to ask at this point is, number one, pay close attention to the slides and what we're walking through. If you have questions, please use the chat because that would be extremely important. And again, what we're talking about here is simply a means of communication that helps pesticide applicators be better stewards by being aware of areas that may be sensitive to their products prior to their use, just as you had talked about in your Section 504. It allows these pesticide applicators to see what is mapped, and it gives them the contact information to reach out to those producers, which is obviously very important for your use. So again, the registries give a real simple, visible tool. So as we walk through this, just number one, make sure that make sure you're paying attention to what we're talking about here. Do the survey at the end, and also just make sure that you understand that in every state, province, area that we're brought to, the registries are brought to the state or the area. And yes, they're managed or administrated by someone in the state, but these are really not of the state. These are a nonprofit registry that the states choose to participate in. So with all of that said, I'm going to start walking through these slides, and we'll go from there. So from day one here, our mission has really been very simple. And like I said, it's to develop this simple, reliable, accurate, and secure mapping tool to enhance the communication between these different groups. So if you don't remember anything that's already been said or will be said, the fact is that the registries are voluntary and free for all the users within the state. Now, the states obviously support bringing the registry there. There's a cost. That's something that we'll work through with Vermont Department of Ag if that topic comes. But for every one of you as a possible user, it's free and it's voluntary. And that's one of the things that we found over the years that really enhances the use, because most folks involved in agriculture or pesticide application in any manner don't always necessarily want another regulation or policy. Obviously, you've got one here, and this could be an answer to that, but we found that the free and voluntary really seems to increase the usage on our registries. So real quickly, how do the mapping registries work? It's really simple because we have a web-based mobile site. We also have a web-based website, and it's really simple to map either the beehive locations, crop locations. Again, the big thing is the pesticide applicators review the application, or what we call the portal called FieldCheck. So there are many different registries, and we'll kind of hit on those. Bob already talked about DriftWatch, BeeCheck. FieldCheck is what we consider that all access pass that the applicators get to see everything that's mapped once they have an account. And then again, it allows the pesticide applicators to see what is there before spraying, and it simply improves their decision making. So obviously protecting pollinators has been a big part of why we do what we do. Vermont has an MP3 or a managed pollinator protection program. Many states do, and the beginning of those MP3s is really what brought the registry to a lot of states. So you'll also see down in the right-hand corner that since 2016, we have been a member and participated with the Honeybee Health Coalition. We do not typically align ourselves with other organizations or nonprofits. Honeybee Health Coalition is a real exception to that because they do such similar work as to what we do, and they are a great voice for not only now in the country, but they are getting requests outside of the country for other folks to understand how they do and what they do here in the US and taking that to other places. So as we focus on BeeCheck, the one thing to remember is that BeeCheck is really the only North America-wide apiary registry. And again, it's used by a whole host of folks from commercial ag, commercial pest control, state and municipal agencies. So we have a lot of folks at the state level that use the registries and pay attention to them. Right-of-way, utility folks, mosquito. And the big thing here too is that most states that adopt the program do exactly what we're doing right here, and that is present this to the pesticide applicators within the state at both times of initial certification and also recertification. So the pesticide applicators typically don't have a really good excuse for saying that they're not aware of the registry because the state typically shares that with them. And again, we're adding new types of users very, very regularly. So to really step this all the way back, and Bob mentioned this briefly, but this goes all the way back to 2008 when Red Gold Tomatoes, who is here in Indiana, were having some very significant issues with off-target spray drift and huge crop losses, as you can see. So they came to Purdue University, and one of the faculty there at the time, who is now the dean of the College of Agriculture at Purdue, said, hey, I'm working with GIS and also this fairly new tool that's really taking off called Google Maps. I think we can harness Google Maps to do what we need to do. And you can see by 2009, 2010, harnessing Google Maps was really a good thing. And that's really where the registries took off and exploded. And as Bob mentioned, by 2012, the registries had grown significantly, and Purdue could no longer handle this internally within their own college. So we were spun out as a nonprofit. And again, as Bob said, he was the very first employee back in 2014. So when you really start taking a look at the different registries, as Bob said, DriftWatch was that very first registry that was set up with the help of Red Gold Tomatoes and Purdue. As of today, our estimate is it's used by nearly 40,000 growers of specialty crops, fruits and vegetables. And the organics, as Bob mentioned, have really become a growing area because organic folks obviously have a huge risk, not only in off-target spray drift, but also even low levels of contamination. Even parts per million can render a certified organic crop to no longer be certified, and that can be a huge impact to those organic growers. BeeCheck is the registry that's probably the most pertinent for our discussions here today. And again, it's used by over 45,000 beekeepers across North America with over 500,000 beehives. And again, the big focus here is both bees and pollinators in areas where they are potentially in areas that could be at risk to pesticide applications. I'm not going to speak about seed field check. That's another way that we've adapted the registry here across the seed corn belt. But again, as I said, field check is that portal specific to the pesticide applicator. So remember this number that I discussed here, used by 14,000 applicators. Those are the folks who are pesticide applicators that have an account within our system, and that's how they're accessing the data. So Bob also mentioned that we've got mobile apps on both Android and iOS, both for the applicator and for the beekeeper. It's great for the beekeepers because, again, beekeepers many times are moving their hives for pollination and other purposes, but it really allows that movement of the hives. So the next few slides, I'm just going to briefly walk through, but I want you to understand that from where we started tracking this data in 2016 up until this year, we've had a fairly significant growth in producers, in applicators, also in mapped acres. You can see that in 2016, we were only just under 500,000 acres. As of this year, 2023, we are just a little over 2.4 million acres. A big part of those acres that we've mapped has to do with that seed field check that we talked about. Again, I'm not going to spend any time on that, but the one thing to remember with that is many of the things that we've added over the years to the registries have been because we've listened very closely to the states, the areas, the growers, the beekeepers, and the folks that we serve. And if there has been an idea, a way to better enhance or use the registries, we always listen to that and take it to our board. And 9 times out of 10, if it is something that really fits in lockstep with commercial agriculture, our board says, let's do this, let's make that change. And so our goal has always been to serve the states and the areas that we're in even better as we move forward. So this next slide again shows the growth in both beekeepers and number of hives. Again, as of this year, we are just over 500,000 hives, which when you take a look at this next map, you'll think, gosh, that's still kind of a small number, right? And it possibly is. This next slide shows you our current map that we have posted on our website. And it shows you that we currently operate in, as Bob said, 24 states, one lone province up in Canada in Saskatchewan, and also Washington, D.C. I'm not going to go through all of these numbers closely, but you'll see that I've got a few states marked here. So we are in discussion right now with the state of Washington. They are coming aboard. It's just a matter of getting all of those details wrapped up. The state of Georgia has said they want to come on board, so they may be closely next. The state of Oregon has also said that they hope to follow closely behind Washington. And I was recently in Idaho, and they take close interest as to everything that goes on in the Pacific Northwest. So if the other two come on board, they may. So the other thing that you'll see here on the map is, as Bob mentioned, there are no states currently in New England as a part of the registry. If Vermont would choose to come on, you all would be the very first state in New England as a part of this registry. And I think you could effectively help influence the other New England states who have been in discussion, but just simply have not made that move yet. So this next slide may be a bit of an eye chart, but this helps you see all across North America, all of the sites as of a month or two ago that were currently mapped. And the one thing that you will see is taking a look at states like Montana here and South Dakota that I'm highlighting. All of those red pins are apiary sites that are mapped. So both of those states have a huge number of apiary sites. And much like your state with an apiary registry, those sites get dropped right onto the map every year. And it's really a simple way for us to work with both the beekeepers as well as the state. So again, this map shows all of the sites, crop sites, bee sites, everything that's mapped. This next slide takes away the crops and shows you just the bee sites. So again, you'll see that, in terms of the number of pins and hives that we've got mapped, there are a ton of beehives mapped across the country, because we know and we understand that having visibility of those hives and those pollinators is really huge in terms of effective stewardship of pesticide applications. So this next slide I like showing, and obviously Illinois doesn't matter to you folks at all, but Illinois has great adoption of the registry. So we like showing this in the fact that we have a few states in the registry that are so well represented that we could take away the US map. And if you know your geography, you would know what states those are just by what's mapped in the state. This next slide zooms in a little bit on the map as an applicator would look at an area. So what this shows on the right-hand side is actually some hives that I have mapped. And no, I'm not a beekeeper, but these are still hives that I have mapped just to show how the registry works. So one of the things that was talked about a bit by Bob, but I'll highlight here, you see that big yellow mark right under where it says beehives, and it says you've elected not to disclose the location and contact information to the public. So this is critical for the beekeeper. It allows you that level of security to add that to your mapping. The other thing that I've added in here, just under notes, there's plenty of space in every site that you map to add notes, and I've just added these notes. But I will tell you, as a beekeeper, adding these types of notes for an applicator to see, those are almost universal terms saying, please contact us as far ahead. And obviously there's a new regulation in Vermont, so that's almost a foregone conclusion. But things like fresh local honey will be provided in return, things like that. It's amazing how that really opens up doors and avenues between pesticide applicators and beekeepers. That gets used a lot, and it really does make a difference. So again, beekeepers could decide, not to treat for mites or hold off on an application event during those application periods. If there's an application near a bee meeting territory or near drones, beekeepers could use caution, obviously, because drones are extremely susceptible. Beekeepers could turn off pollen traps. Beekeepers could pull mite treatment. So many different things as a beekeeper that you could potentially do with this communication between you and the pesticide applicators. So in that previous slide, I asked you to remember that 14,000 number. Again, those are the pesticide applicators that have an account expressly in our system. Now, what you're seeing here is all of our third-party precision ag systems that currently pull in data. And so this is a very low estimate. We think that an additional 30,000 pesticide applicators across North America use this data to pull or use their applications to pull our data into their systems. So whether it's John Deere's system, Raven's system, who is now owned by Case IH, or many of the ones in the middle that the aerial applicators use, this gives them the ability in their spray rig on the ground or in their aerial applicator to see exactly the areas that they need to pay attention to. Now, obviously, for that 48-hour window, they can, and many of them do, look at these systems prior to, and many of these systems also have a back office dispatching methodology behind them so that people sending jobs out to the field can look at these days prior and have that communication that was talked about previously. We also did a survey starting back in 2021 I'm not going to walk through all of the details of this, but one of the things that we really got out of this, and again, much of this was in states where there isn't a requirement, as you folks have recently put into place. So in Indiana, we had a beekeeper saying that they had an aerial applicator contacting them in at least 24 hours in advance, and it really made a big difference as to how they work together. Again, it's an applicator sharing that I have a job to do, but also working with that beekeeper to say, we understand that you have a job to do. How can we both do our jobs together and not cause each other any harm? So that's really been huge. And again, another bit of feedback from Nebraska, very similar, that the applicators did reach out and talk to the beekeepers prior to their work. So again, as Bob had mentioned, the registries are very much free to use. We have member states, and you can see all of this on our website. We have sponsor companies, so food and ag companies, retailers. We have trade associations. We have many large retail applicators, co-ops that support us. We also have producers, and we also have folks such as you, once the registry comes to their state, that they look at it and say, this is such a value to me. We want to become a member and we want to support you financially on an annual basis. Nobody asks for that, but when we have that kind of support, it makes a huge difference to what we do and how we do it, especially as we continue to grow and add states. That kind of support is absolutely invaluable to us. So this next slide just gives you an idea of who some of our sponsors are. Now, I will tell you that we have a few sponsors that say, hey, we want to support you financially. Don't worry about giving us any credit. We just want to do the right thing, and we don't need our name in print. But you can see that there are a lot that do. And again, these types of sponsors really support us financially on an annual basis, and we simply could not operate without that type and without those levels of support. So as we talked about early on, the questions now are, what is needed of you all? So number one, there in red, fill out the survey at the end of this webinar, right? That's really important, because how and what you respond with is going to help both Sydney and the Bee Lab. It's going to help the Vermont Department of Agriculture determine, is this a tool that you all feel could really assist you in what you do in complying with this newest regulation. But even more than that, just communicating between the three groups of the pesticide applicators, the beekeepers, and the crop producers. So again, if this is something that you're in favor of, let your extension agents know, let the Vermont Bee Lab know that you're interested. If you have folks that work in similar spaces, feel free to share with your neighbors, retailers, and others about it. Point them to our website. You'll see a couple of QR codes here on the next slide that will easily point you to both our forward-facing website, but also the map website as well. So again, ask questions, put things in chat. And again, stay tuned for updates, because if this is something that Vermont does bring on board, very similar to what we've done here today, probably not in this level of detail, but would likely be included in your state pesticide certification training. So right here, I am going to pause. I am going to put my camera back on so you can see me, but these two QR codes, the one on the left takes you directly to our forward-facing FieldWatch.com site that gives you all of the background, the history, our sponsors, more about what we do. The QR code on the right will take you directly to the DriftWatch registry page, which is where you can see the maps and you can see things that are mapped in all of the states that are not currently under that level of protection that only a pesticide applicator can see. So with all of that, Sydney, I'm going to go ahead and pause. That way, if there are questions, anything that came in through the chat, we can address those at this point.
Great. Thank you so much for all the information, Kurt. That was really great. I also just want to mention, this is for the beekeepers. When you take the survey, you'll notice a question asking whether you would be willing for the Vermont Agency of Ag to merge your GPS coordinates into FieldWatch. And so that is an opportunity, an option that we have in the state, since we already do have an apiary registry, to actually just merge GPS locations into FieldWatch. So there's a better likelihood of pesticide applicators to see where your locations are and notify you without all the work of creating accounts.
was on the list.
I think somebody's unmuted. Thank you. So we do, and so Sarah, would you mind dropping the survey link into the chat? Or I can as well. Oh, perfect. Okay, so if everybody goes to the chat, you'll see a link there, which will take you to the survey. We really appreciate your time filling this out. And it looks like we have a couple of questions, but if anybody has another question, feel free to chime in at this point. So Mike had a question addressing the understory around apples. Apples may not be in bloom, but the dandelions and clovers below the crop could be in bloom. Could we have a provision that requires mowing of the blooming understory before spray is applied? So Laura responded to this.
Yeah, I can,
Sure.
yeah, I don't, so right now it doesn't explicitly say that in the rule. When you read it, but I was thinking about it and I included this in the chat because I don't know if the chat will appear in the recording, but so the rule doesn't explicitly say that you have to mow, but if someone is applying a highly toxic pesticide, even when the crop is not in bloom, according to that section of the rule, it does seem like that mowing would create conditions of least exposure to bees, and that would be necessary. So I'll have to bring that to the agency for more clarity on how it is enforced. So.
And the rule does have some stipulation about pollinator attractive forage as well in the vicinity. Laura?
Yeah, that's in the buffer.
Mhm.
If you are spraying, you need to have a buffer that is non-pollinator attractive. And so, if you're spraying your apples and there's blooming dandelions and violets, then obviously there's no buffer there. So that's what makes me think that in the case that a highly toxic pesticide were to be applied, even if it's not in bloom, that something would be need to be done to mitigate the exposure route to honeybees. So that's a good question. Thank you. I am not a regulator, so I don't know. And so that's why I say it's something that we'll have to ask. We are putting together a frequently asked questions document for farms together for this. I was hoping to have it ready for today, but it isn't quite ready yet. And so that is really helpful to include in that, because there's been a lot of questions coming from applicators and all of you folks, beekeepers, about the interpretation of the rule.
Thanks, Laura. And Ross says, given that the majority of insecticides in use today are systemic and thus make it impossible to prevent pollinator exposure in most instances, this new rule comes across a bit like window dressing to give the appearance that we're protecting bees from pesticide damage, when in practice it only improves the situation for pollinators marginally. How can a registry prevent honeybee pesticide exposure to the systemics like neonics, since they are not covered by application when blooms are not present, etc.? And I don't know if you want to speak on that, Laura. I also have a couple of things to say on that.
I don't have a response.
Yeah, I guess this will just be, how we further interpret these laws and amend them as we go. But I mean, we aren't the regulators. But I will say that I've been thinking about FieldWatch as it pertains to neonicotinoids, as I realize that this is a major problem. And I was thinking that FieldWatch could also be a tool that planters could use and crop producers can use to notify the beekeeper, not only when they're spraying a pesticide, but when they are planting a neonic treated seed in proximity to your apiary. So as the Agriculture Innovation Board is discussing best management practices for neonics, I think this could also play into that.
And again, Sydney, as I had mentioned, right, we always want to listen to user states, areas, and if that were something, and I'm not saying that we've even considered that yet, but that's something that we would be more than happy to at least take to our board and share with them that that's an opportunity. And so just so everybody else also on the call understands, I was at a conference here a couple of weeks ago, and I heard someone from Corteva, who is one of the primary seed treatment companies across the country. And in fact, I put Sydney in touch with one of these folks because I didn't listen to his entire presentation real close, I'll be honest, but he mentioned a non-neonic seed treatment that they were working on that was specifically designed as honeybee friendly. And that really piqued my interest because I really felt that beekeepers would be interested in that in areas where it could apply. So again, there are technologies coming down the pipe to help offset some of those neonics.
Great. And yeah, I also think that, you know, notifying of planting neonics doesn't only have to pertain to beekeepers, also notifying your nearby crop growers, I think is important because we are putting chemicals into the soil. And we know that neonics are highly soluble. So this could pertain to more than just beekeepers. Great. Well, if anybody has any other questions, you can put them in the chat. And as Sarah mentioned, we ask that you fill out the survey by the end of the day. So just let me know. I'll put my contact information in the chat. So if there's a conflict and you can't fill it out today, just please let me know. And thank you so much for joining us, everyone. Really appreciate your time. And thank you to Kurt and Laura and Sarah and Bob.
Welcome.
Thanks for having us. We appreciate the time.
Absolutely.
So Sydney, did you end up with an actual number of attendees that you had once we
Like
got
about
rolling?